Welcome, world, to yet another episode of Manage Your Damn Money, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money. Malcolm, this is a show that airs as a TV show and also as a podcast for those who are listening. Another beautiful week, Malcolm. We're here back in the studio. How are things going for you?
All good, man. Can I just say really quickly that I really love this area of mine. This place that I grew up, the DC metro area.
Okay.
And I'll tell you a reason why. So this morning, I'm walking to the metro. And outside of the metro, there is a full-on jazz ensemble.
Okay.
Blaring at the top of their instruments. Mm-hmm. And as I walk past the ensemble that was, collecting tips and whatever like that, there's a guy whose job it is to pass out the newspapers that come from the metro, and
right,
called the Express.
Absolutely.
He's reading out loud the headlines of the day on the newspaper as he's passing them out to people. And so by the time I got on the train, I was like wide awake. This is like, keep in mind, this is 7:10, 7:15 in the morning. Everybody looks like zombies.
Right.
These people did a very good job of waking me up and helping me start my day. And I was thinking, there's no place like home. I really appreciated that start to my morning.
Well, they got you a nice little shot of espresso. Spirit espresso.
Better for my health.
Indeed. Well, of course, as we always do here on Manage Your Damn Money, real quick news for us. We had an actually exciting moment last week, which actually came to fruition this week. We went, you and I both, Malcolm, to the Motley Fool.
Yeah.
We had a conversation with Chris Hill. He's the host of a couple of their podcasts at Motley Fool, but we actually got a chance to talk about the history of Manage Your Damn Money, the history of how I met you, and then also how we decided to create this podcast called Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm.
Down memory lane.
It was pretty cool. We talked about millennials' interest in home buying, also millennials' interest in driving around in a van as a living place. So people want to listen to that podcast. You can find it if you just go to Apple Podcast on your Apple phone and look for Market Foolery. It's the current episode up, or a couple episodes down by the time this one airs. But it was a pretty cool conversation, really nice conversation. Chris is a really cool guy, so thanks to Chris and the Motley Fool for once again giving us a bit of pub and highlight in the world. How is training for a marathon, Malcolm? I didn't get any tweets or information about your whereabouts as it comes to running. How's marathon training going?
It's going. So I'll say I walked here all the way from the metro station before, on my way to the show.
That's practice right there.
And as you know, it's uphill almost the entire way.
It's about a mile, maybe.
And when I walked in the door, as you saw, I was breathing like I had just been sitting on the couch for 30 minutes. So I feel encouraged.
Okay.
Because there have been times, there's a 5K they do every year here on Howard's campus. And there's been times I've run up that hill and questioned, why am I doing this? And so that hill, usually takes me out. But today I felt pretty good.
Well,
so I'm encouraged.
As they say, be encouraged, young man. We'll see how that goes. Of course, as we know, there's $100 at the end of this here marathon for Malcolm if he makes it. So as we do on every episode of Manage Your Damn Money, it is time for headlines. And the headline that we pulled for this episode of the show, Toys R Us files for bankruptcy. The filing was expected and comes as all retail is undergoing a shift to e-commerce and heightened competition from a variety of sources. Toys R Us operates, if you didn't know, about 1,600 stores around the world, and said businesses would proceed as usual for customers, though some bankruptcy experts say or warn there could be noticeable changes like the difficulty of finding popular toys. Toys R Us plans to use the bankruptcy to restructure $5 billion worth of debt and to create a quote-unquote sustainable capital structure, which doesn't really sound compatible with $5 billion of debt. But anyway, the debt, $444 million of which was due next year or comes due next year, stems largely from a $6.6 billion leveraged buyout. In the first 6 months of 2017, more than 20 retailers filed for bankruptcy. Sorry about that. In the first 6 months of 2017, more than 20 retailers filed for bankruptcy with thousands of stores closing. So this has kind of been coming. And a quote from the story that we pulled, fixed interest and lease payments proved too onerous for these leveraged retailers as sales and margins deteriorated. Tax and advisory firm BDO wrote in a September report, certain larger retailers that filed for bankruptcy had burdensome levels of debt resulting from their private equity owners' use of financing in acquiring the companies. And just so people know, they filed for Chapter 11, Malcolm, bankruptcy. And Investopedia lists that as Chapter 11 being something which is a form of bankruptcy that involves a reorganization of the debtor's business affairs, debts, and assets. Named after the U.S. Bankruptcy Code 11, Chapter 11 is generally filed by corporations that require time to restructure their debts, and it gives the debtor a fresh start subject to the debtor's fulfillment of its obligations under the planned reorganization. So, first of all, Toys R Us had a huge amount of debt, which I guess people brought on to buy the company at some point in the past.
But so Toys R Us is, I hate to say this to them because they were good to me back in the day, but Toys R Us essentially is the Blockbuster Video of toys.
Yeah.
Right? Like they failed to adapt and adopt.
That's an excellent comparison.
You know, because at this point, like Toys R Us should have been dropping toys in my front yard on Christmas morning via drone strike. Like, if they're really keeping up with the times. Like, Amazon has the ability in Seattle and a couple other places to drop your package on your front porch 2 hours after you ordered it.
Wow.
Like, that's the kind of instantaneous fulfillment Amazon is capable of. And Toys R Us, if they really wanted to stay in the game, that's a little bit extreme. But they should have been, with that $6 billion or whatever, figuring out a way to become more streamlined and more, you know, advanced in today's technological terms. And so, you know, it's kind of like good riddance, right? Like, you know, you failed to change, and so somebody came and ate your lunch, so to speak.
Indeed. I think it's interesting that we get to see, kind of like you mentioned with Blockbuster, there is an element of our childhood legitimately that is now, at least Chapter 11 doesn't mean Toys R Us is going away completely, but it means that they're in serious trouble as a business. And so it's like it's going away. And so like that element we won't be able to relay, like you said, going to the Blockbuster, because I remember at 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 going to Blockbuster on Fridays and it being like, how many videos and video games can I get rented from mom and dad? That's gone. And now we're seeing Toys R Us, an experience which most of us have felt, especially as millennials, walking through the aisleways, seeing all the toys and kind of feeling like, can I get one, or which one do I want in the future? That moment is gone. No more, I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid.
So from a practical business perspective, right, you got to think about how much it costs to rent that square footage that a Toys R Us occupies, right?
Absolutely.
And then you think about how much space a Toys R Us toy, a Lego set, whatever it is, actually occupies physically in that store.
Right.
How many toys are you physically capable of keeping on hand at any one time versus how much square footage you occupy because you have a physical item that has to move off the shelf? That essentially is the challenge to not only Toys R Us, but just brick and mortar as a whole. Because so many people are now trusting of online methods of purchasing goods. It's a lot tougher to have a physical presence, have to pay for square footage, occupying all that space with one item, and, you know, so on and so on. So I think, you know, in that brick and mortar space, they're really more so just a showroom. Like, they're really not a sales place the way they used to be. Now it's just a place for me to go try it out, then go home and comparative shop and buy it online and wait 4 or 5 days for it to show up.
Absolutely. What does that tell you, especially with news like that? And the reason why we pulled this is because obviously Toys R Us has like that nostalgic thread for us. But what does this tell you as, you know, someone who deals with financial investments on a day-to-day basis? For someone as a normal consumer or average consumer of news and business news, what does this tell you about that space of retail and what that means from an investing standpoint?
It explains why Amazon is trading at, I don't know, what, $1,000 a share or whatever they are at this point. And similar online retailers like Alibaba is the Chinese version of Amazon, and they, you know, same thing. Like, everybody is gravitating toward online, and so you hear about like JCPenney has filed Chapter 11 and closed X number of stores, Macy's, and so on and so on. Like, all those stores that used to be a big deal even 10 years ago. Like, when you think about Christmas shopping, where do you go?
I mean,
to your
most
laptop.
people just go online. Yeah.
So think about Christmas shopping when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
You had to physically go to a store. You actually picked out what you wanted and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
That doesn't exist anymore. And so actually shopping malls are hurting really bad too.
Right.
And so that gives you some idea of all the bigger department stores that used to be a great investment once upon a time are now kind of just, falling by the wayside or restructuring like this to try and just tread water.
Right.
But I will say on a positive note for these retailers, Chapter 11 doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world because our current president has tremendous expertise in the world of Chapter 11 bankruptcy and somehow still was allowed to become president. So maybe they're going to make a resurgence and we'll see Toys R Us all of a sudden is everywhere the same way the president is. I don't know. We'll see.
As Kevin Garnett once said, anything is possible. Indeed. So real quick too, I wonder, using this as an example, how do you read news and then interpret trends for like investing purposes for someone who's new to investing? Like, how do I take a story like this and kind of understand what that means for the different waves that are happening?
So like you and me are one of our peers.
Just one of our peers who might be casually investing or considering investing.
So I would say, first of all, we're talking, outside of like your retirement, 401k investing and that kind of thing, because you should not be trading stocks inside of your 401k. I know that some plans allow it and it makes it possible, but you're almost always going to end up in worse shape than you were. But anyway, so looking at the financials of a company is definitely one of the best ways from a Wall Street perspective to gauge how well a company is going to perform. That's what we call technical analysis. Right. The average person could care less about, what the debt to income ratio is for a company or, whatever. So you look at like the fundamentals, things like Toys R Us being a seasonal business would be a fundamental of that company. So maybe you're buying Toys R Us on the premise that, Christmas shopping will take off Black Friday and then once the Christmas rush has died off, I'll sell, the stock, something like that. Right. Those are things that, you would want to pay attention to the news of something like this. Okay. I'll tell you that me personally, I actually have Outlook reminders set for all kinds of different events that I've read in the news that are going to take place.
Oh, wow.
And so like earnings calls come out quarterly for all these companies if they're publicly traded. I'll actually start to pay more attention to the news for one of the companies that I've added to my watch list and I have an Outlook reminder for. Right. A couple days before to decide, all right, am I going to sell it on the news from the earnings or am I going to hang on to it or buy more shares or whatever it is? So I would say paying attention to the trend and whether the news you constantly hear about a company is positive or negative is an easy way to gauge it. Right. So you don't necessarily have to get into the finer points on the technical, financial ratios, but just paying enough attention to know what kind of shape the company is in, because you keep hearing about them in the news and they're in trouble, or you keep hearing about them in the news and they're doing really well.
Absolutely.
Two examples of that would be Apple and Equifax. So,
one's doing really good, one's doing really bad.
So just think about it like that, follow it for a few months, see what the news looks like on that company going forward. Right. And then that could be your gauge on whether or not you should be messing around with that company. But I would just reiterate the rule from our first intro to investing show, which is do not invest in anything you don't understand.
Absolutely. That's always excellent and basic advice. We want to remind folks you're listening and watching Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We want to remind folks that you can always find us on our website at www.manageyourdamnmoney.com. And if you have a comment, concern, or question that you want to send us to us at info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. We've been getting some great comments lately, some great suggestions. And in this music break, we're going to hear a piece from Mr. Beats by Beeman. You can find his music on Instagram at Beats by Beeman. Just spell it how it sounds. On this episode of Manage Your Damn Money, this is actually a listener-produced episode of MYDM. We're going to talk about a couple different topics when we come back, submitted all by MYDM listeners. You're listening to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. And on this episode of MYDM, this is a listener-produced episode. We actually made the call, and our listeners answered. We've been asking over the last couple of weeks for you guys to send some questions and comments and things that you think or would like to know more about. And you guys answered the call wonderfully. The first topic that we're dealing with is the real deal behind student loan forgiveness. This question was sent in by one of our favorite listeners, Lauren. She sent in the question, is there such a thing as student loan forgiveness? What do you have to do to qualify for student loan forgiveness? Or are student loan forgiveness programs as real as Neverland? That was essentially her question. And I have a great interest in knowing the answer to these things because I could use some loan forgiveness myself.
I wasn't sure that you hadn't written that into the show yourself. Like, you blamed it on Lauren. And
Lauren prefaced, she gave me the basis for the question, and I made it kind of, what I just wrote or said. But the question that she raised, like I said, is student loan forgiveness. How does it work? And like I said, I would like to know the answer to this myself. So I pulled up a July 2017 Investopedia article by Sean Ross, which explains student loan debt forgiveness programs. And the piece reminded us that in 2016, the average college graduate borrowed between $26,000 and $31,000. Mine is many multiples of that. Collective student loan debt, of course, as we know, tops $1.4 trillion in the United States as a whole. But in the piece, Sean went on to say that debt forgiveness programs are exactly what they sound like. In a student loan forgiveness program, qualifying borrowers may have some or all of their public student debt forgiven, either immediately or over a period of time. Unfortunately, none of these programs forgive private loans. So for those who have private banking loans who have gone to school, stop listening. This is not for you. There's no way out. You have the ball and chain on your ankle until death do you part, or pay them off. Currently, there are 4 major programs and several other minor programs that might cancel or significantly reduce your federal student loan debt balance. The major ones are public service loan forgiveness. So like if you work in like a public sphere or public service sphere of some kind. There's the Perkins loan cancellation. Then there's an income-based repayment, and then also teacher loan forgiveness. The catch is, at least in my opinion, these may not apply if the debtor is in default status. Oh no, that's not my opinion. That's actually a fact. Meaning the loan has gone unpaid for more than 9 months. So if you're in default and you haven't paid on your loans for a while, then you won't qualify for any of these. And then, of course, many of these require annual submission of official paperwork to student loan servicers, and any missteps might disqualify an otherwise eligible borrower. So like with many...
That's a really important part.
Absolutely. So like with many programs and government assistance programs, if you miss
anything, if you misstate a digit, if you spell your address wrong, anything they can use to not grant you the forgiveness,
absolutely,
they will use it.
Absolutely. So state and municipality-based programs are available, but you have to search for those programs specifically for your city and state. I actually found one for Maryland, which I literally printed out the paperwork for today. This is a hilarious story. So there's a Maryland commission on like student education or something like that. I can't remember what it was. They have a tax rebate program of some kind where they will essentially give you $5,000 or maybe the $5,000 as a tax credit to pay towards your student loans. And it was due September 15th. It was like September 16th, 17th, and the documents that you had to download to print out to fill it out were not working on the website.
So you didn't get to submit?
I'm submitting it anyway. Look, I hit refresh today and it worked.
Okay.
After the deadline. So it's a pretty hilarious set of circumstances. But that's an example of...
it's kind of like trying to get Beyonce tickets online. You just got to keep trying and reset and
hit refresh
until it finally But so for things like that though, to your point, you definitely, it's worth checking out whether or not your local municipality offers that. Like I don't even remember how I came across that. And unfortunately, I didn't qualify because.
Did you send it to me?
I did.
Oh,
but I was gonna let you. I was gonna let you cook. But so every different locality has their own version of that,
okay,
or some kind of program. But the challenge to it is you only have 2 years to be able to prove that you used it to pay off the student loan debt.
Right.
So for folks who look at it and say, oh, I'm going to take the $5,000, go buy a new car,
right,
blah, 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 blah. Yeah, well,
they're
coming for it.
Right.
Like, you have to be able to prove that it went toward paying down that student loan. And to that end, make sure you keep very good records of your payment and,
absolutely,
the check you wrote or where it drafted out of your account, that sort of thing, because that will all be necessary come tax time.
Absolutely. Sure. And nationwide, the most common programs, as I mentioned earlier, are public service and teacher loan forgiveness plans. Full-time public servants can have their entire federal loan balances forgiven within 10 years. Teachers at qualifying low-income schools may receive partial forgiveness ranging from $5,000 to $17,000, excluding those who only have plus loans, which I think parent plus loans are the things that like your parents are attached to. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting thing, because especially for millennials, when you talk about doing anything for 10 years, like that's pretty highly unlikely to happen for any millennial anywhere.
But that's the point. They're offering it to you so that you will stay, and they know, all right, well, we're more likely to keep people on the rolls if they're chasing student loan forgiveness.
Right.
And so I don't know what the metric is that tells you whether somebody has a higher or lower propensity for staying.
Sure.
But I would guess, though, when you look at it, like if you're 5 years into this career and you look and go, yeah, I could go work somewhere else, and they're offering me an additional $7,000, $8,000, $10,000. Is that still, after taxes, is that worth what you would get for that student loan forgiveness?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that, but that's the equation they're banking on you having to make and deciding, you know what, I think I'm better off here with the federal government.
Right. And I think to me it's interesting, one of these things that are really attached to these programs for the most part are always these long 10 years of service to a particular organization or a government entity. And what that also implies is that you would have to sacrifice upward mobility, especially if that upward mobility took you outside of that particular organization.
And geographical mobility.
Absolutely.
So the ones that are attached to buying a home, where they'll give you like your down payment in the form of your student loan payoff or whatever the math is. Those things are tied to, you've got to be in that home, in that state, whatever, for 10 plus years also. So it limits your geographical mobility too.
So, and I think those things are like, it almost makes these programs, at least in my opinion, null and void, because very few people are going to sign up to like stay in the same situation for 10 years for the benefit of getting their loans paid off. I mean, some people might. And then there's
your financial circumstances. Everybody's financial circumstances are going to be like snowflakes. Like no two situations are going to be alike.
Right.
So it works for some people and it doesn't work for other people. Like if I worked for the federal government in some position that, is like unique to the Fed and I have it made and I have no reason to go anywhere else.
Right.
Why wouldn't I take that 10-year forgiveness and also take the 10-year forgiveness aligned with me buying a house that's in the same place that I'm going to be living and working for the next 30 years or whatever. So, I mean, it really just depends on where you actually are financially and what your different ambitions are.
That's a good point. Maybe it's just that I find being at 10 years somewhere is kind of absurd, but that's just me. The Obama Student Loan Forgiveness Plan is one of the things that are like the major programs. Came into existence after the Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010. It might be identified more correctly as a debt restructuring program with possible forgiveness in the future. So that's another one. Borrowers who qualify may consolidate all of their federal student loans into one single loan, at which point the borrower may choose from 5 different repayment options. These options include, which I'm all too familiar with: standard, graduated, income contingent, income-based, and pay-as-you-earn, or PAYE. These all offer a wide range of attractive reconstructions, but essentially, as we know with student loans, you end up still having to pay the full balance, just in a different way, in a different order, with a different amounts.
But kind of like that Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring.
It's the exact same thing. And then the last thing, which gets you to forgiveness or partial forgiveness, it's called the total and permanent disability discharge. The Department of Education also offers relief to those who have significant physical or mental impairments and are unable to engage in what they call substantial gainful activity, or a real job. You have to be able to prove your disability to the Department of Education to qualify for this. So I think this is all interesting stuff, Malcolm. Do the qualifications I really kind of want to go back to this point that some of these qualifications for the way these programs are structured makes it feel to me as if it's unrealistic. In addition to that, one of the challenges is I'm losing my thought. I'm like catching dementia or something.
You might qualify for one of these.
Right.
So I think the thing to keep, I get what you're saying, and I think the thing to keep in mind is there's no such thing as a free lunch,
Right.
Like you're going to have to give up something in order to get somebody to be willing to pay off thousands of dollars that
Right.
you owe. It's not like, you know, any of us has a fairy godmother that's gonna just wave a wand and say 50 grand gone. Like, you know, if Oprah was to somehow stumble across this show and decide, you know what, I like what those guys are doing, I'm gonna, you know, then that's one thing.
Right.
Just saying, Oprah, if you're out there. But otherwise, like, you got to be willing to make an equal, if not worse off, exchange
Right.
in the short term,
Right.
to be able to, or that's to say, in the long term, to be able to realize that short term gain, which
Absolutely.
would be them freeing you from that burden, which is student loans. Because
Right.
then that frees up a lot of money for you to do other things,
Right.
right? Like buy a house or start a business or whatever you decide to do.
Right.
So there's the trade-off, and I get the negatives to it also, but you know, nothing comes for free. So,
Absolutely.
you know.
I think another challenge too, and this is what I was going for, and this is where I lost my thought. All these programs, at least for the majority, happened during the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Right. Which
You
was
better get them while they're hot.
which is but watch me and watch this.
I
as
see
the
you,
pastor
Pastor.
would say.
I see you, Pastor.
Watch this. Administrations change, right? And these requirements say 10 years. Before 10 years, the current president will be gone if he was there for as long as he could be there. So it's one of those things where the program that you're applying to or hoping you qualify for might not even be in existence 9 years from now because one administration killed it or because they decided it wasn't of value or for whatever reason. So there's or maybe the program changed and you don't meet the new qualifications of the program. What do you say to that?
Under the current administration, I understand your apprehension wholeheartedly. I will say, though, one thing to keep in mind is that the way policy works, the way that law changes, our legislative branch works, is the policies that are being put in place today, you really don't even ever see the effects of them until the next person is in power anyway.
That's true.
So like the George Bush tax cuts, for example, that went into effect in like 2003 or something, they carried all the way through Obama's tenure and then also got reinstated from President Obama for like an additional 4 years.
Right.
So sometimes, you know, you have to keep in mind that just because somebody puts something into law today, that doesn't necessarily mean that it takes effect today. They just signed the executive order and then sat in the Oval Office doing this for 30 seconds for the soundbite.
Right.
But it didn't actually take hold until 3, 4, 5, 6 years later. So, you know, I would say, yes, there is some cause to be concerned in today's climate, today's political climate. But in generalities, like it's kind of tough to just completely rip a piece of policy out that 5,000 people have benefited from in 2017 alone, and so on and so on. But the way the healthcare debate is going, I'm not as confident in saying that as I would have been, you know, 9 months ago or whatever.
Right. And then finally, here on Manage Damn Money with a bit of Malcolm, a lot of places, you kind of alluded to them earlier, a lot of municipalities, states, counties, cities, whatever, are implementing new like home buying programs where they'll pay back some or arrange some amount of your loan to be paid off if you make a down payment on a house. But again, Maryland has a program like this that I actually looked into thinking it was a little bit more broad than it actually was. And then I went and looked and saw, and actually it has to be this very specific set of houses offered by this very particular one or two real estate companies, and typically homes that you probably wouldn't really want to get into unless you just really were pressed to be in a house. And so it's one of those interesting things where to get something, you're having to trade something, as you said, which is an interesting like kind of component of this whole loan forgiveness thing?
It's for them, it's a net present value calculation versus net future value, right? Like I said,
Right.
you get in the immediate term, you get your house.
Right.
They get you as a taxpayer for 10 years.
Right.
You are probably at the front end of your earnings potential as a taxpayer.
Absolutely.
And so as you stay in that house and your family grows and you get married and have kids and you get new jobs and new whatever else, all that is increased tax revenue for my state that I wouldn't have gotten had I not been willing to give you that $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 tax credit.
Right.
Which, oh, by the way, you know, comes out of a pool that was subsidized by some other governing body anyway. It
Right.
probably was like federal money that they reallocated or something. I don't know. But so, like, you know, I get your point again that it isn't as appealing as somebody just saying, here you go, here's a check.
Right.
But almost nothing in America works that way.
Right.
Like that kind of is the same as like that UBTI, Universal Basic Income,
Yeah.
whatever that we talked about on the show a while back. Like nobody is giving you anything for free in America, and if they offer it to you, run the other way.
Right. Absolutely.
So, you know.
Absolutely. Well, we want to remind folks you're listening and watching Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We're going to take a quick music break, but when we come back, we're going to continue this listener-produced episode of Manage Your Damn Money. The next topics, we're going to cover money software, and also we're going to get into our favorite books for understanding money and wealth. That's what's ahead. We're going to remind you can listen to music by our in-house producer and co-creator of this show, Beats by Beeman. Just find his music and his account on Instagram at Beats by Beeman. And also, we want to remind you again, you can listen to our episode on Market Foolery on the Motley Fool. So if you search Motley Fool and look for Market Foolery, you'll see an episode titled Manage Your Damn Money, and you'll hear us tell the story of how this show came to be. You're listening and watching Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back.
Now listen. Now listen.
Is Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We are back with our listener-produced episode of Manage Your Damn Money. We talked about the real behind student loan forgiveness. Do you think student loan forgiveness actually exists after that conversation, Malcolm, or is it just like a trade-off for everything?
Yeah, I mean, it exists. It's just, you know,
It's
nobody's writing you a blank check. Sorry, Lauren. I hope that, you know, I know that's probably not what you were not expecting to hear. She's probably going to go back to beating me up now. But, you know.
Absolutely. The next question that we actually got was from Sebastian. He sent the question asking about useful software to use for organizing finances into one place. To have a dashboard to look at your finances. So we've actually talked about that in earlier episodes, but I think it bears repeating. Useful software and programs for having a financial dashboard, so to speak. And when I say dashboard, meaning you can look at one place and see what your 401k is doing. You can see what your IRA is doing. You can see what your savings account is doing. You can see kind of your full complement of financial, holding, so to speak.
Right. Your net worth.
Your net worth, and even, I suppose, the bills that you owe and the debt that you have to pay. You can put them all in one place. Really quickly, we'll mention Mint and QuickBooks are ones that everyone's kind of aware of. Both allow you to patch your finances into one platform and allows the setting of reminders for bills and other important financial dates. Another one that we mentioned before on the show is Finance Tracker LearnVest, which they have some kind of investing advisement component as well. And beyond that, I'm not really too sure of any other known and trusted entities. But I think it's interesting because asking about financial dashboards kind of tracks me back to the whole question of Equifax.
Right.
And the value of, at least the way that I'm thinking about it, of not looping all your things into one place. Because if you loop everything into one place, meaning your passwords and so on and so forth, if that entity gets hacked, then everything that you have is at risk, including your like account to your student loans, down to your savings, your checking account, your credit cards. So to me, it's almost a value not plugging everything into one thing sometimes, because then you reduce your vulnerability to some extent. What do you think about that, Malcolm?
Well, you know, as a person who doesn't trust much of anything, I 100% agree. But to take it a step beyond that, even not worried about folks hacking you and stealing the information,
right?
I'm a little bit worried about them willfully giving and selling it away.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, and this is probably a little bit of inside baseball, but having worked inside of banking institutions before,
right,
I see where they give you the software to aggregate all of your different accounts. You can just log in your username, password, and suck it into your online login to whatever your bank account is. And so then to your point, you can look at your bank accounts at this particular institution, outside institutions, your 401k plan, any other thing that has a login that uses a username and password, right? But then what happens is the bank itself uses that aggregated information to sell you financial products.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's only so long before they start to sell other people your information and say, Ben might be interested in this thing that y'all have.
Right.
We don't offer it because we're a bank, so we don't do, insurance or whatever. But you might want to talk to Ben. And for that introduction, we're going to charge you 2 cents.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden, you've got people selling off my information that I trusted you with as your customer.
Right.
But then because you slipped something into the terms of agreement online one day in the middle of the night that I just clicked on and said, all right, man, I want to check my balance.
Right.
All of a sudden, you're selling my information away. So
And to that point, it's like I get emails from my bank. And I'm sometimes like, why do you somewhat know that I could be interested in a home loan? Why are you sending me that email now? Literally today, now this is a much smaller example, I was online at work looking at some sunglasses, and suddenly that exact same pair of sunglasses showed up in my Instagram feed as I'm scrolling as an ad. And I'm just like, okay, guys, like, I get it. And I think people maybe underestimate how connected all these things are. And so that,
big data is real.
Big data is a real thing, and they've been talking about it for a while. So it's definitely something to consider, especially in the era of hacks and people's social security numbers being at risk. Something to really consider. We're going to take another quick music break and hear from Beats by Beeman. But we want to remind folks, if you have a question or inquiry, send it to us at info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. Also, if you're a musician, singer, or producer of music of some kind, we would love to hear from you. If you want your piece to play during one of our episodes, send it to us and let us know you want it to come on, and we'll run it if it's good.
Also, be sure to connect to us, follow us, social media handles at MYDM1, at Malcolm on Money. Definitely, if you want to see shows like this again, be sure to send those, questions, comments, concerns, that kind of thing there too.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. Today is a listener-produced episode of Manage Your Damn Money, where we took a couple submissions from listeners of the show to answer questions that you all had. The last one that we're actually covering, our favorite books for understanding money and wealth. We talked about this on Market Foolery, the Motley Fool podcast, Malcolm. I was reading Money Magazine at like the age of 15 and 16. So I was kind of doing it a lot earlier than most.
Nerd alert.
Exactly. But one of my favorite books that I actually read later than, like, I got this book at that same age range and never read it.
Okay.
Like, I never read it. And then I think only like within the last year and a half did I actually read it from front to back. And that book is the famous personal finance book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It's the purple book with Robert Kiyosaki on the front. It was a simple book about understanding what wealth means and how wealth is created in real terms, understanding business opportunities, and multiple streams of income. It's also on your list, Malcolm. Like, when did you read it, and what did you like about it?
So I guess I actually am a slacker like you. I was given, one of my uncles gave me the book when I was in high school.
Okay.
I was like 15 or 16 when he gave it to me. And same thing, I didn't read it until I went to college.
Wow, okay.
And I just I think I was like a junior or senior in college. Mm-hmm. And one of my business professors had mentioned the book and said something along the lines of, if you haven't even bothered to read this particular book, I don't have anything to say to you on the topic of like personal finance or something. Like, this is one of my econ teachers that I used to like go to his office, and like we would have arguments on whatever, and he would like pull out his dry erase board and draw charts and graphs to prove me wrong.
So at recess, or at lunch, you were in the professor's office doing math problems and econ problems.
Nerd alert, as I said. But so like, because he was so emphatic about it and kind of shamed me because I owned the book and had never actually bothered to read it, I actually did dig into it, and I've probably read Rich Dad Poor Dad like 10 times.
Oh, wow.
Like, it's one of those that like every single time I read it, I get something new from it because I'm at a new phase financially in my life than I was when I read it the first time, or my aspirations have changed financially since the last time I read it, and so it kind of helps to like reshape my perspective on what I should be doing with my money.
That's an interesting point. I didn't even think about that. The next one on my list personally is Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. And that was
Tell me more.
Another excellent suggestion by Mr. Malcolm Etheridge and Will Harris, also known as Beats by B-Man. Both of them read it and suggested that I read it, and it ended up being one at the top of my list. And the book is actually about, focusing on the long-term and concerted effort that you have to put out when it comes to networking and the value of doing that over time. It answers questions about building confidence that you need to network and how to make it a part of your lifestyle kind of habitually, such that you're always networking at every point and every moment of your life. I thought it was really powerful because it put in real terms, like networking when I went to college meant something like you walk into a room with a name tag on and you try to introduce yourself awkwardly to a bunch of people who you've never met before. That's what networking meant to me at like age 20.
That's how the average person at 45, 55 thinks of networking too, which is why it's such a dirty word at this point.
Absolutely. But this particular book, Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi, was a book that really kind of helped coach me in my mind to understand the interactions that I had with people casually differently, and talks about indexing those relationships in a way that makes sense and also makes use of like the digital technologies that we have available to us today. Another one that's on the top of my list for understanding money, and Never Eat Alone, is like connected because it's like career and how you build your quote unquote empire, whatever that empire might be.
There's a cliche that your network is your net worth.
They do say that.
That's something to keep in mind. And then also something I heard somebody say, and I don't even remember who to give credit to at this point anymore, but I heard somebody say that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around.
Oh, wow.
Which was really heavy, but then when I started to think about it and who those 5 people or even 10 people would be, it's like, man, that is a really like profound, so just thinking about that in your personal network could make some financial difference too, assuming you're in the room with the right people who,
Absolutely. Another book that I really found profound and is not at all directly connected to money, but it's about kind of life, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, which is a big one. Will Smith said he loves the book. I've read it twice. I think it's one of the few books that I've actually read twice. Knowing, fully remembering what I understood about the book before. And similar to what you said, when I read it the second time, it was like I felt like I was pulling all these different new things from them. So definitely a good one. And then I also felt the need to add this random book covering the fair tax.
Okay.
And that was just a random book I picked. I don't even remember what it's called, but I picked it up from the library and explained the difference between like an income-based tax, which we have now, which is like, taxable income, and like a fair tax, which is essentially a tax tacked on to everything new that we buy, such that everybody's paying the equal amount of tax relative to the things that they purchase.
The history of taxation and how and when and where it came to be, specifically in this country, is a fascinating thing for anybody who, like me, nerds out on that kind of crap.
Absolutely.
But it's really like amazing to me, like the way that folks were almost conned in a sense into voting in a tax that essentially goes against their best interest. But anyway, I won't even go down that.
Absolutely. So, Malcolm, it's time for your list.
So we touched on Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I recommend to literally any and everybody who asks me, like, what should I be reading that, would give me some idea of things I should be doing with my money. But another one, shout out to the Motley Fool yet again. But a book that they read, that they wrote probably 20 years ago at this point. It's called The Motley Fool Investment Guide for Teens. The title is a little bit misleading in that it says teens. But as I've told you before, I actually give this one away to clients of mine.
I've still not read this yet. I've seen it in your office.
You definitely check it out. So I've given it away to clients of mine when their kids go off to when they graduate from high school and say, have your kid read or your grandkid read this over the summer before they go to school. And inevitably what ends up happening is because it's a book that's very simple and is a light read, it probably takes you 2 weeks at the most if you're really like just picking it up casually.
Right.
What happens is the client, the older person, 55, 65, 75 years old, reads the book first before they give it to the kid or grandkid. And almost always when I've given this book away, I get, oh my God, I wish I had read that book 30 years ago. Like I would be in a much different place financially and I would understand things far better than I do now.
Right.
And that tells me that, essentially I'm fishing in the right pond because it does a very good job of just breaking down like the very complex world of personal finance.
Absolutely.
Almost what we try to do on this show every Tuesday, right?
Every single week. What else you got?
So the next one on there is a book called Why Didn't They Teach Me This in School?
I hadn't heard about this one before.
So another very good book on personal finance from the perspective of the average person. I hate to say it that way, but that's really the way, folks who aren't like me who spend hours every day involved in this world. Right. It's 99 personal money management principles to live by. And literally they give you very good bare bones ideas, kind of like where we talk about like making sure you've maxed out the amount that your company is willing to match in your 401k. There's an entire sleeve dedicated to just that concept. Right. Then also something like dollar cost averaging, so buying investments over time at smaller intervals, so that on average over a longer period of time you end up buying the whole market cycle instead of just getting in on the worst possible day. And, those are all concepts that they go through in that book. That when you're reading through it, you do literally say, why didn't he teach me this in school? Right. I've told you my thoughts on the American education system, and I won't even, bother to kill our last few minutes on that. But that's another one that I thought was really good. And then lastly, the first book I think I ever read that was on the subject of personal finance, and that was because my mom picked it up or somebody gave it to her or whatever, and she was like so excited about it, she almost like forced it on me. Was The Millionaire Next Door, which is a very good book that was written, 30 years ago or something at this point, that talks about how the wealthiest people in this country are not who you would expect them to be. Sure. And then also goes into sort of how they amass that fortune, what the average millionaire looks like, lives like, spends like, what their tastes actually are, despite what we tend to think they would be, all those kind of things.
Right.
So it's a very fascinating read for anybody who's ever interested in becoming wealthy in this country.
Right. Before we wrap everything up, what's like the biggest one thing you would say is the greatest value of actually reading? For someone who doesn't fancy themselves a big reader or even like audio book listener, like what's the value of actually sitting down and reading one of these books that were written, 20, 30 years ago?
Knowledge is power, my brother.
Well then, I guess with that we could wrap with what's the more you know. Right. Well, I guess there's nothing else to say with that. Knowledge is indeed power, as we know here on Manage Your Damn Money. We want to remind folks you can listen to episodes of Manage Your Damn Money on Apple Podcasts. Simply search Manage Your Damn Money. You can also find us on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Manage Your Damn Money, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Manage Your Damn Money. I can be found on Instagram at MYDM1.
At Malcolm on Money, and also those of you who are here locally in the DC metro area, you can catch us on quite a few local access channels. So search the website for that. They're posted on manageyourdamnmoney.com as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So until next week, be good with your money.
Peace.
Peace.